The 2024 presidential campaign was truly a historic and unprecedented campaign for president. You had Joe Biden, the incumbent president, running for re-election, eventually dropping out, forced to endorse his vice president, Kamala Harris, to be the next president. You had people in the Democrat Party calling for an open primary at the Democratic convention. On the Republican side, you had a president who lost re-election in 2020, who was basically exiled from politics. You look at Donald Trump's re-election bid, his announcement. You had virtually no sit-in Republican senators or representatives there. He was basically exiled from his party, comes back, faces 2 assassination attempts, and wins the popular vote by 2 million votes. If you're looking at a two-way split, he won almost 52% of the vote. Overall, he only won 49.8%, but if it was a two-way split, he wins 52%, a feat that has only been done 3 times since 1988. George Herbert Walker Bush, 1988. George Bush in 2004, and Donald Trump in 2024. Truly a historic campaign that who knows if we'll ever see something ever again like this. Donald Trump won all 7 swing states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Huge victories. He won 312 electoral votes. He secured almost 50% of the popular vote, 77 million votes. This was the first Republican win on the popular vote side since 2004. He improved his vote share by 3 million votes from 2020. You saw Donald Trump only won, I think he got about 74 million, I think 74 million in 2020. And in 2016, he increased his vote share by 14 million votes since 2016. And you saw a nationwide rightward shift in 9 out of 10 counties. 90% of counties moved towards Donald Trump in 2024 compared to 2020. Donald Trump really swept the swing states, and popular vote marked a decisive victory. I'm not going to sit here and say this was a giant landslide because simply go to look at 2004. Look at 2008. That was a pretty big win for Obama. He made deep inroads in Republican counties. Go back to Bill Clinton. It's like, historically speaking, it was a big win. It was a decisive win. I'm not going to sit here and say it was a landslide by historical standards, but it was very significant in a modern age where elections are extremely close. In the broad geographic shift, the rural, suburban, and even some urban areas showed a complete rejection of the incumbent Democrat administration. 312 electoral votes for Trump, 226 for Harris. You saw across the board when it comes to demographics that Trump won 1 in 3 non-white voters, a historic gain for a Republican candidate. And this is exactly how Donald Trump won the 2024 election. That's what we're going to talk about, how Donald Trump won the 2024 election. Like we said, 1 out of 3 non-white voters voted for Donald Trump. Latino men shifted 12 points to the Republican Party compared to 2020. Latino women shifted 7 points to the Republican Party. You saw young Latinos, ages 18 to 29, shifted 12 points to the Republican Party. You saw black voters moved 7 points more to the Republican Party. Across the board, you had demographics after demographics shifting towards the Republican Party. Support among African Americans went from 12% in 2020 to 20% in 2024. And on the flip side, you look at Democrat or women, African American women, showed virtually no change in support from 2020. And women of color, women in general, is where Democrats, that's their meat and potatoes. That is their rank and file of their voters right now. So while Donald Trump is making these ginormous gains with black men, with Latino men, with non-white voters, with men, with women, you're seeing when it comes to black women, you're seeing core constituencies of the Democrat Party. Democrats are not increasing their vote share. Donald Trump is able to hold strong with his support among black women. Democrats were not able to make up any ground among that. You look at young voters. Young voters were huge in electing Donald Trump in 2024. Donald Trump won almost 42% of the young vote, which is 18 to 29-year-olds, in 2024, compared to only 35% in 2020. It was a shift of roughly 7 percentage points. 7 percentage points for the Republican Party for young voters. Men, women, didn't matter anything. Men and women shifted huge to the Republican Party. And then, of course, men overall shifted 6% more to the Republican Party. Women shifted only 1% towards Donald Trump. You saw men. Donald Trump wins 55% of men, up from 49% in 2020, but only 45% of women in 2024 compared to like 43.5% in 2020, which totally blows up this whole idea that Donald Trump only has support among white working class voters, this sort of white rage. That's how it was put in 2016. You remember Al Sharpton on MSNBC talking about how this was a white backlash against a black president. Could not be further from the truth. And let's just listen to it. I don't think it was Al Sharpton. I think it was actually Van Jones. Just listen to it.
People have talked about a miracle. I'm hearing about a nightmare. It's hard to be a parent tonight for a lot of us. You tell your kids, don't be a bully. You tell your kids, don't be a bigot. You tell your kids, do your homework and be prepared. And then you have this outcome, and you have people putting children to bed tonight, and they're afraid of breakfast. They're afraid of, how do I explain this to my children? I have Muslim friends who are texting me tonight saying, should I leave the country? I have families of immigrants that are terrified tonight. This was many things. This was a rebellion against the elites. True, it was a complete reinvention of politics and polls, it's true. But it was also something else. We've talked about race. We've talked about everything but race tonight. We've talked about income. We've talked about class. We've talked about region. We haven't talked about race. This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president in part. And that's the part where the pain comes.
And now, could someone make the argument that that was the case back then? I think it was not true. I don't think it was true. But ultimately, you can see that that did not stick one bit. Donald Trump built a multi-ethnic working class coalition that expanded way beyond the traditional borders in the Republican Party, but beyond the traditional white, non-college educated, which that's who you assume. When you think of a Trump supporter, that's what you think of. And to be honest with you, white, non-college educated voters only shifted 3% towards Donald Trump. There was significantly bigger shifts among Latino men, young voters of color, that totally flipped the script, gave the middle finger to the Democrat Party, to Democrat assumptions about how diverse electorates are going to really enable the Democrat Party. Harris totally failed to pick up any support elsewhere. She totally failed to mobilize women, particularly black and white women, to counterbalance Donald Trump's massive gains with key Democrat strongholds that are now missing. Because not only is it a vote that's not voting for Kamala Harris, it's a vote that's not voting for Kamala Harris, and it's voting for Donald Trump. And you'd think with an electorate that in 2024 was 3% less white than it was in 2012, with 36% of young voters and 39% of old voters making up the actual electorate, which 36% of young voters, if you look at the electorate as a pie chart, 36%, a third, were young voters. In 2012, when Barack Obama won, it was only 18%. Older voters was down almost 18%. They made up 57% of the electorate back in 2012. In 2024, they only made up 39% of the electorate, which resembles much more of an Obama coalition. But somehow this electorate favored Donald Trump. Somehow. Latino men, plus 12 for the Republicans. Black men, plus 7. Young voters, plus 6. Women, plus 1. The Obama coalition has elected Donald Trump twice. Let's just recognize reality here, because that is what's happened. He has 100% mobilized the Obama coalition from 2008 and 2012. And there's two sides of this. Yes, did Kamala Harris lose this election? 100%. But did Donald Trump have to pick up? Did he have to fill the gaps that were left behind by the Democrat Party? 100%. You can't analyze one in a vacuum. You can't just talk about how Kamala Harris lost the election without talking about how Donald Trump won the election. You can't talk about how Donald Trump won the election without talking about how Kamala Harris lost the election. But like we said, Donald Trump, the coalition expanded. Donald Trump got, what was it? Upwards of 1 in 3 voters of color, up from like 10%. 1 in 10 voters of color voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. And irregular voters, low propensity voters. Donald Trump, we know that was a big thing leading up to the election. Low propensity voters, we heard it time and time again. Low propensity voters would come out. And it really had flipped the script. People thought lower turnout elections favored the Republican Party. Higher turnout favored the Democrat Party. Totally flipped the script. Totally rejiggered how election marketing works. And made it that a Republican would win in a higher turnout election. And although, yes, did Harris retain core Democrat groups, consistent voters, women, older voters, but she didn't make any inroads with those voters either. She just maintained, which is not what was needed to win. Because her losses among irregular voters, young voters, voters of color, compounded. They compounded time and time again. And they overlapped with other demographic shifts, like Latino voters moving away. And lower turnout in Democrat-leaning urban areas reduced her new voter enthusiasm, which really hurt her chances. But the reality was you didn't need voters in California or New York to turn out. You needed voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada to turn out. And it's like, this was a decisive victory, driven by a higher Republican turnout, significant shifts in support among young voters, men, voters of color, and irregular voters, and a strategic focus on battleground states, and Kamala Harris's inability to refresh the Democrat coalition with new, younger voters and maintain the levels of support that they had in 2020 among key demographics led to a complete collapse of her election chances. And this election underscores the importance of mobilizing irregular voters, low propensity voters, and addressing these demographic trends that we clearly saw happen. Like, look at this. We're going to wrap this video up real quick, but you want to talk about Latinos. Go back to 2016. Some of the most Latino counties in America, right here, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. These were voting for Hillary Clinton by 15, 35, 29. Fast forward to 2024, Donald Trump wins Miami-Dade by 11 points. Broward only votes for Harris by 17. You can look at the shift here. Let's go from 2016. Miami-Dade moved 41 points to the right. Broward County moved 18 points to the right. Palm Beach moved 14 points to the right. Go to Texas. Look at all these border counties down here. These were counties that were voting for Hillary Clinton by huge margins. They're moving to Donald Trump by 53 points, by 48 points, 55 points, 76 points, 43 points, 38 points. Like, that is insane. In 2016, you're looking at, where's Starr County? Starr County, Clinton wins 80% of the vote in Starr County. Now this Donald Trump wins almost 60% of the vote here. Clearly a shift within the Latino community. But that is going to wrap things up for today, folks. This is how Donald Trump won the 2024 election. As always, drop down below, hit that subscribe button, make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. And folks, we will catch you next time.